Chapter 9. One afternoon, while recapitulating in the cave, I fell asleep. Upon awakening, I found a pair of beautifully polished crystals lying on the ground next to me. For a while, I deliberated whether or not to touch them, for they looked quite ominous. They were about 5 inches long and perfectly translucent. Their tips had been fashioned into a sharp point, and they seemed to shine with a light of their own. When I saw Clara walking toward the cave, I carefully slid the crystals onto my palm and crawled out the cave to show them to her. "Yes, they are exquisite," she nodded, as if she recognized them. "Where did they come from?" I asked. "They were left here for you, by someone who's watching you very closely," she said, putting down a bundle she was carrying. "I didn't see anyone leave them." "That person came while you were dozing off. I warned you not to fall asleep during your recapitulation." "Who came while I was dozing? One of your relatives?" I asked, excitedly. I laid the fragile crystals down on a pile of leaves and put on my shoes. Clara advised me never to wear shoes while recapitulating, because by constricting the feet, they impede the circulation of energy. "If I told you who left the crystals, it wouldn't make any sense to you, or it might even frighten you," she said. "Try me. After seeing your shadow move, I don't think anything can frighten me." "All right, if you insist," she said, untying her bundle. "The person who's watching you is a master sorcerer, with very few equals on this earth." "You mean a real sorcerer? One who does evil things?" "I mean a real sorcerer, but not one who does evil things. He is a being who shapes and molds perception the way you might paint a picture with your brushes. But that doesn't mean that he is arbitrary. When he manipulates perception with his intent, his behavior is impeccable." Clara compared him to the Chinese master painters, who were said to have painted dragons so lifelike that when they put in the pupils as the finishing touch, the dragons flew right off the wall or the screen on which they had been painted. In the low tone of a meaningful disclosure, Clara said that when a consummate sorcerer is ready to leave the world, all he has to do is manipulate perception, intend a door, step through it, and disappear. The deep passion expressed in her voice made me uneasy. I sat down on a large flat rock, and holding the crystals, I tried to fathom who the master sorcerer might be. Since the day I arrived, I hadn't talked to anyone but Clara and Manfred, simply because there was no one else around. There wasn't any sign of the caretaker Clara had mentioned either. I was about to remind her that she and Manfred were the only beings I had seen since my arrival, when I recalled that there had been one other person. I had seen a man who seemed to have appeared out of nowhere one morning when I was sketching some trees near the cave. He was squatting in a clearing about 100 feet from where I was. The cold was making me shiver, and also made me focus my attention on his green windbreaker. He had on beige trousers and the typical wide-brimmed straw hat of northern Mexico. I couldn't see his features because he wore his hat tilted over his face, but he seemed muscular and limber. He was facing sideways. I could see him fold his arms across his chest. Then he turned his back to me, and to my utter amazement, brought his hands all the way around his back where he touched his fingertips. Then he stood up and walked away, disappearing into the bushes. I quickly sketched his squatting posture, then put down my drawing pad and tried to imitate what he had done. But no matter how I stretched my arms and contorted my shoulders, I couldn't touch my fingers behind my back. I continued squatting with my arms wrapped around me. In a moment, I had stopped shivering and felt warm and comfortable in spite of the cold. "So, you've already seen him," Clara remarked when I had told her about the man. "Is he the master sorcerer?" Clara nodded and reached into her bundle to hand me a tamale she had brought for my meal. "He's very limber," she said. "It's nothing for him to dislodge his shoulder joints, then ease them into place again. If you continue your recapitulation and store enough energy, he may teach you his art. The time you saw him, he just showed you how to fight the cold with a specific posture, squatting with the arms wrapped around the chest. Is that some form of yoga?" Clara shrugged. "Perhaps your paths will cross again, and he'll answer that question himself. In the meantime, I'm sure these crystals will help you to clarify things inside you." "What exactly do you mean by that, Clara?" "What aspect of your life were you recapitulating before you fell asleep?" she asked, ignoring my question. I told Clara that I had been remembering how I hated to do chores at home. It seemed to take me forever to wash the dishes. What made it worse was that all the while I could see my brothers playing ball outside the kitchen window. I envied them for not having to do housework and loathed my mother for making me do it. I felt like smashing all her precious plates, but of course I couldn't. How do you feel now, recapitulating all this? "I feel like smacking all of them, my mother included. I can't bring myself to forgive her." Perhaps the crystals will help you rechannel your intent and your trapped energy," Clara said softly. Driven by a strange urge, I slid the crystals between my index and middle fingers. The crystals fit comfortably, as if they were attached to my hands. "I see you already know how to hold them," she remarked. "The master sorcerer instructed me that if I saw that you could hold them correctly by yourself, I was to show you one indispensable movement that you can do with these crystals." "What kind of movement, Clara?" "A movement of power," she said. "I'll explain more about its origin and purpose later. For now, let me just show you how it's done." She told me to firmly press the crystals between my index and middle fingers. Helping me from behind, she gently made me extend my arms in front of me at the height of my shoulders and rotated them in a counterclockwise direction. She had me begin making large circles that became increasingly smaller until the movement stopped, and the crystals became two dots pointed into the distance. Their extended imaginary lines converged at a spot on the horizon. "When you make the circles, be sure to keep your palms facing each other," she corrected me. "And always begin by making large, smooth circles. This way you gather energy that you can then focus onto whatever you want to affect, regardless of whether it is an object, a thought, or a feeling." How will pointing the crystals affect them? I asked. To move the crystals and point them the way I showed you takes the energy out of things, she explained. The effect is like diffusing a bomb. This is exactly what you want to do at this stage of your training. So never, under any circumstance, rotate your arms in a clockwise direction while holding the crystals. What would happen if I rotated them in that direction? You would not only make a bomb, but you would light the fuse and cause a gigantic explosion. A clockwise movement is for charging things, for gathering energy, for any enterprise. We'll save that movement for a later occasion, when you are stronger. But isn't that what I need now, Clara, to gather energy? I feel so depleted. Of course you need to gather energy, she agreed. But right now, you must do it by demolishing your indulgence in absurdities. There's plenty of energy you can harness simply by not doing the things you are accustomed to, like complaining or feeling sorry for yourself or worrying about the things that can't be changed. Diffusing these concerns will give you a positive, nurturing energy that will help to balance and heal you. On the other hand, the energy you would gather by moving the crystals in a clockwise direction is a virulent kind of energy, a devastating blast that you won't be able to withstand at the moment. So promise me that you will not under any circumstances attempt to do it. I promise, Clara. But it sounds rather tempting. The master sorcerer that gave you these crystals is watching your progress, she warned. You must not misuse them. Why is this master sorcerer interested in watching me? There was a tinge of morbid curiosity in my question. I was uneasy, yet I felt flattered that a man would go to the trouble of observing me, even if it was from a distance. He has designs on you, Clara replied casually. My alarm was instantaneous. I clenched my hand into a fist and jumped up indignantly. Don't be so stupid and leap to the wrong conclusion, Clara said, annoyed. I assure you, nobody is trying to get in your pants. You really do need to recapitulate your sexual encounters in depth, Taisha, so you can get rid of your absurd suspicions. Her tone, devoid of all feeling, and her vulgar choice of words were somehow sobering. I sat down again and mumbled an apology. She put a finger to her lips. We are not involved in ordinary pursuits, she assured me. The sooner you get that straight, the better. When I speak of designs, I mean sublime designs, maneuvers for a daring spirit. In spite of what you think, you are very daring. Look at where you are now. Every day, you sit for hours alone in a cave, recapitulating your life away. That takes courage. I confessed that whenever I thought how I had followed her and was now living in her house as if it were the most natural thing in the world, I became totally alarmed. It has always baffled me, she said. Yet, I never asked you outright what made you accompany me so willingly. I would not have done it myself. My parents and brothers always told me that I'm crazy, I admitted. I suppose that must be the reason. Some strange emotion is bottled up inside me, and because of it, I always end up doing weird things. Such as what, for instance? Her sparkling eyes urged me to confide in her. I hesitated. There were dozens of things I could think of, each a traumatic event that stood out as a milestone to mark a moment when my life turned, always for the worse. I never talked about these catastrophes, although I was painfully aware of them, and during the past months of intensive recapitulating, many of them had become even more poignant and vivid. Sometimes I do silly things, I said, not wanting to go into detail. What do you mean by silly things? Clara probed. After more prompting on her part, I gave her an example and told her about an experience I had had not too long before in Japan, where I had gone to participate in an international karate tournament. There, in Tokyo's Budokan, I had disgraced myself in front of tens of thousands of people. Tens of thousands of people? She echoed me. Aren't you exaggerating a bit? Definitely not, I said. The Budokan is the largest auditorium in the city, and it was packed. Recalling the incident, I felt my hands clenching and my neck tensing. I didn't want to continue. Isn't it better just to let sleeping dogs lie? I asked. Besides, I've already recapitulated my karate experiences. It's important that you talk about your experience, Clara insisted. Perhaps you didn't visualize it clearly enough or breathed it in thoroughly. It still seems to have a hold over you. Just look at you. You're breaking out in a nervous sweat. To appease her, I described how my karate teacher had once let it slip that he thought women were lower than dogs. To him, women had no place in the world of karate, especially not in tournaments. That time, in the Budokan, he wanted only his male students to go on stage to perform. I told him that I hadn't come all the way to Japan just to sit on the sidelines and watch all the male team competing. He warned me to be more respectful, but instead I became so angry that I did something disastrous. What exactly did you do? Clara inquired. I told her that I became so enraged, I climbed onto the central platform, grabbed the gong from the master of ceremonies, struck it myself, and formally announced my name and the name of the karate routine I was going to demonstrate. And did they give you a grand applause? Clara asked, grinning. I flubbed it, I said, near tears. In the middle of the long sequence of movements, my mind went blank. I forgot what came next. All I saw was a sea of faces staring at me in disapproval. Somehow, I managed to get through the rest of the form and left the stage in a state of shock. To take matters into my own hands and to disrupt the program the way I did was bad enough. But to forget my form in front of thousands of spectators was the ultimate insult to the Karate Federation. I brought shame to myself, my teachers, and I suppose to women in general. What happened afterward? Clara asked, trying to suppress a chuckle. I was expelled from the school. There was talk of revoking my black belt, and I never practiced karate again. Clara burst out laughing. I, on the other hand, was so moved by my shameful experience that I began to weep. On top of that, I was doubly embarrassed for having revealed it to Clara. Clara shook my shoulders to jolt me. "Do the sweeping breath," she said. "Breathe in, now." I moved my head from right to left, breathing in the energy that was still hopelessly caught in the exhibition hall. As I brought my head back to the right again, I exhaled all the embarrassment and self-pity that had enveloped me. I moved my head repeatedly, doing one sweeping breath after the other, until all my emotional turmoil was released. Then I moved my head from right to left and back again without breathing, thereby severing all ties with that particular moment of my past. When I had finished, Clara scanned my body, then nodded. "You are vulnerable because you feel important," she declared, handing me an embroidered handkerchief to blow my nose. "All that shame was caused by your misguided sense of personal worth. Then, by bungling your performance, as you were bound to do, you added more insult to your already injured pride." Clara was silent for a moment, giving me time to collect myself. "Why did you quit practicing karate?" she finally said. "I just got tired of it and all the hypocrisy," I snapped. She shook her head. "No. You quit because no one paid any attention to you after your misadventure, and you didn't get the recognition you thought you deserved." In all honesty, I had to admit Clara was right. I had believed I had deserved recognition. Every time I committed one of my wild, impulsive acts, it had been to boost my self-image or to compete with someone in order to prove that I was better. A sense of sadness and dejection enveloped me. I knew that in spite of all my breathing and recapitulating, there was no hope for me. "Your inventory is changing very naturally and harmoniously," Clara said, tapping my head lightly. "Don't worry so much. Just concentrate on recapitulating, and everything else will take care of itself." "Perhaps I need to see a therapist," I said. "Although, isn't recapitulating a kind of psychotherapy?" "Not at all," Clara disagreed. "The people who first devised the recapitulation lived hundreds, if not thousands, of years ago. So you certainly shouldn't think of this ancient renewing process in terms of modern psychoanalysis." "Why not?" I said. "You have to admit that going back to your childhood memories and the emphasis on the sexual act sounds like what psychoanalysts are interested in, especially the ones with the Freudian twist." Clara was adamant. She stressed that the recapitulation is a magical act in which intent and the breath play indispensable roles. "Breathing gathers energy and makes it circulate," she explained. "It is then guided by the pre-established intent of the recapitulation, which is to free ourselves from our biological and social ties. The intent of the recapitulation is a gift bestowed on us by those ancient seers who devised this method and passed it on to their descendants. Clara continued. Each person performing it has to add his or her own intent to it. But that intent is merely the desire or need to do the recapitulation. The intent of its end result, which is total freedom, was established by those seers of ancient times. And because it was set up independently from us, it is an invaluable gift. Clara explained that the recapitulation reveals to us a crucial facet of our being. The fact that for an instant, just before we plunge into any act, we are capable of accurately assessing its outcome, our chances, motives, and expectations. This knowledge is never to our convenience or satisfaction, so we immediately suppress it. What do you mean by that, Clara? I mean that you, for example, knew for a split second that it would be a deadly mistake to jump onto the stage of the auditorium and disrupt the performance. But you immediately suppressed that certainty for various reasons. You also knew for a moment that you had stopped practicing karate because you felt offended at not being praised or given recognition. But you instantly covered up that knowledge with another, more self-enhancing explanation, that of being fed up with the hypocrisy of others. Clara said that this moment of direct knowing was called the seer by the people who first formulated the recapitulation, because it allows us to directly see into things with unclouded eyes. Yet in spite of the clarity and accuracy of the seer's assessments, we never pay attention to it or give the seer a chance to make itself heard. Through a continual suppression, we stifle its growth and prevent it from developing its full potential. In the end, the seer inside us is filled with bitterness and hatred. Clara went on. The ancient men of wisdom who invented the recapitulation believed that since we never stop subduing the seer, it finally destroys us. But they also assured us that by means of the recapitulation, we can allow the seer to grow and unfold as it was meant to do. I never realized what the recapitulation was really about, I said. The purpose of the recapitulation is to grant the seer the freedom to see, Clara reminded me. By giving it range, we can deliberately turn the seer into a force that is both mysterious and effective. A force that will eventually guide us to freedom instead of killing us. This is the reason why I always insist that you tell me what you found out through your recapitulation, Clara said. You must bring the seer to the surface and give it the chance to speak and tell what it sees. I had no problem understanding or agreeing with her. I knew perfectly well that there is something inside me that always knows what's what. I also knew that I suppress its capacity to advise. Because what it tells me is usually contrary to what I expect or want to hear. A momentary insight I had to share with Clara was that the only time I ever invoked the seer's guidance was when I looked at the southern horizon and deliberately sought its help, although I had never been able to explain why I did that. Someday all that will be explained to you, she promised. But from the way she was grinning, I deduced that she didn't want to say any more about it. Clara suggested I return to the cave for a few more hours, then come to the house and take a nap before dinner. I'll send Manfred to fetch you, she offered. I declined. I couldn't have possibly gone back into the cave that day. I was too exhausted. Revealing to Clara my embarrassing moments and having to fend off her personal attacks had left me emotionally drained. For an instant, my attention was caught by light being reflected on one of the crystals. Focusing my attention on the crystals calmed me. I asked Clara if she knew the reason why the Master Sorcerer had given me the crystals. She replied that he hadn't actually given them to me, but that he had rather recovered them on my behalf. He found them in a cave in the mountains. Someone must have left them there ages ago, she said gruffly. Her impatient tone made me think that she didn't want to talk about the Master Sorcerer either. So I asked her instead, "What else do you know about these crystals?" I held one up to the sunlight to see its translucence. The use of crystals was the domain of sorcerers of ancient Mexico. They are weapons used to destroy an enemy. Hearing that gave me a jolt. Gave me such a jolt. I nearly dropped one of the crystals. I tried to give them to Clara to hold, wanting nothing more to do with them, but Clara refused to take them. Once you hold crystals like these in your hands, you can't pass them on, she reprimanded me. It's not right, in fact. It's dangerous. These crystals must be treated with infinite care. They are a gift of power. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't mean any disrespect. I just became frightened when you said that they were used as weapons. Formerly, they were, but not today, she clarified. We've lost the knowledge of how to turn them into weapons. Was there such a knowledge in ancient Mexico? There certainly was. It's part of our tradition, she declared. Just as in China, where there were ancient beliefs so far-fetched that they have turned into legends. Here in Mexico, we also have our share of beliefs and legends. But how is it that nobody knows very much about what went on in ancient Mexico, while everybody is aware of the beliefs and practices of ancient China? Here in Mexico, there were two cultures that collided head-on, the Spaniards and the Indians, Clara explained. We know everything about ancient Spain, but not ancient Mexico, simply because the Spaniards were the victors and tried to obliterate Indian traditions. But in spite of their systematic and relentless efforts, they didn't succeed completely. What were the practices associated with the crystals? I asked. It is believed that sorcerers of ancient times used to hold the mental image of their enemy while in a state of intense and pinpointed concentration, a unique state that is nearly impossible to attain and certainly impossible to describe. In such condition of mental and physical awareness, they would manipulate that image until they found its center of energy. What did those sorcerers do with their enemy's image? I asked, driven by morbid curiosity. They used to look for an opening, localized usually in the area of the heart, like a tiny vortex around which energy circulates. As soon as they found it, they would point at it with their dart-like crystals. At the mention of pointing with the crystals at the image of an enemy, I began to shiver. In spite of my discomfort, I felt compelled to ask Clara what happened to the person whose image was being manipulated by the sorcerers. Perhaps his body withered, she offered. Or maybe the person met with an accident. It is believed that those sorcerers themselves never knew exactly what would happen. Although, if their intent and power were strong enough, they would be assured of success in destroying their enemy. More than ever, I wanted to put the crystals down. But in the light of what Clara had said, I didn't dare profane them. I wondered why on earth anyone would want to give them to me. Magical weapons were terribly important at one time, Clara continued. Weapons, such as crystals, became an extension of the sorcerer's own body. They were filled with energy that could be channeled and projected outward across time and space. Clara said that the ultimate weapon, however, is not a crystal dart, a sword, or even a gun, but the human body. For it can be turned into an instrument capable of gathering, storing, and directing energy. We can regard the body either as a biological organism or as a source of power, Clara explained. It all depends on the state of the inventory in our warehouse. The body can be hard and rigid, or soft and pliant. If our warehouse is empty, the body itself is empty. And energy from infinity can flow through it. Clara reiterated that in order to empty ourselves, we have to sink into a state of profound recapitulation and let energy flow through us unimpeded. Only in quiescence, she stressed, can we give the seer in us full reign, or can the impersonal energy of the universe turn into the very personal force of intent. When we have emptied ourselves sufficiently of our absolute and encumbering inventory, she went on, energy comes to us and gathers itself naturally. When enough of it coalesces, it turns into power. Anything can announce its presence. A loud noise, a soft voice, a thought that isn't yours, an unexpected surge of vigor or well-being. Clara emphasized that in the final analysis, it made no difference whether power descends on us in a state of wakefulness or in dreams. It is equally valid in both cases, the latter being, however, more elusive and potent. What we experience in wakefulness in terms of power should be put into practice in dreams, she continued. And whatever power we experience in dreams should be used while we are awake. What really counts is being aware, regardless of whether one is awake or asleep. She repeated it, peering at me. What counts is being aware. Clara was silent for a moment. Then she told me something I considered to be completely irrational. She said, being aware of time, for example, can make a man's lifespan several hundred years. That's absurd, I said. How can a man live that long? Being aware of time is a special state of awareness that prevents us from aging quickly and dying in a few decades, Clara explained. There is a belief handed down from the ancient sorcerers that if we would be able to use our bodies as weapons, or, put in modern terms, if we would empty our warehouses, we would be able to slip out of the world to roam elsewhere. Where would we go? I asked. Clara looked at me in surprise, as if I ought to know the answer. To the realm of not being, to the shadows world, she replied. It is believed that once our warehouse is empty, we would become so light that we could soar through the void, and nothing would hinder our flight. Then we could return to this world youthful and renewed. I shifted on the uncomfortable rock, numbing my tailbone. But this is just a belief, isn't it, Clara? I asked. A legend handed down from ancient time? At this moment, it is just a belief, she acknowledged. But moments, like all things, are known to change. Nowadays, more than ever, man needs to renew himself and experience emptiness and freedom. For a moment, I wondered what it would be like to be as vaporous as a cloud and float up into the air, with nothing to bar my coming and going. Then I mentally returned to Earth again and felt obliged to say, all this talk about being aware of time and passing into the shadows world, Clara, is impossible for me to accept or to understand. It isn't part of my tradition, or as you put it, it isn't part of the inventory in my warehouse. No, it isn't, Clara agreed. This is sorcery. Do you mean to say that sorcery still exists and is practiced today? I asked. Clara suddenly got up and grabbed her bundle. Don't ask me any more about it, she said flatly. Later on, you'll find out whatever you want to know, but from someone who is more capable of explaining these things than I. Chapter 10. Clara sat on the rattan armchair at the edge of the patio, brushing her shiny black hair. Then she arranged it with her fingers until everything was in place. When she had finished grooming herself, she brought her left palm to her forehead and stroked it in a circular fashion. Then she moved her hand over the top of her head and down the back of her neck, after which she flicked her wrists and fingers in the air. She repeated this stroking and flicking sequence several more times. I was fascinated watching her movements. There was nothing careless or haphazard about them. She performed them with intense concentration, as if she were engaged in a most important task. "What are you doing?" I asked, breaking the silence. "Are you giving yourself some sort of facial massage?" Clara glanced over at me, sitting on the matching armchair, imitating her movements. "This circular stroking prevents wrinkles from forming on the forehead," she said. "It may appear like a facial massage to you, but it isn't. These are sorcery passes, movements of the hand that are designed to gather energy for a specific purpose." "What specific purpose is that?" I asked, flicking my wrists the way she had done. "The purpose of these sorcery passes is to keep one looking youthful by preventing wrinkles from forming," she said. "The purpose has been decided beforehand, not by me or by you, but by power itself." I had to admit that whatever Clara was doing certainly worked. She had lovely skin that set off her green eyes and dark hair. I had always believed that her youthful appearance was the consequence of her Indian genes. I never suspected that she deliberately cultivated it by means of specific movements. Whenever energy gathers, as in the case of these sorcery passes, we call it power, Clara continued. "Remember this, Taisha. Power is when energy gathers, either by itself or under someone's command. You're going to hear much more about power, not just from me, but from the others too. They're expected back at any time now." Although Clara constantly referred to her relatives, I had by now given up all hope of ever meeting them. Her reference to power was another matter. I had never understood what she meant by power. "I'm going to show you some sorcery passes that you must perform every day of your life from now on," she announced. I let out a sigh of complaint. There were so many things that she told me to do every day of my life: the breathing, the recapitulation, the kung fu exercises, the long walks. If I lined up back to back everything she told me to do, there wouldn't be enough hours in the day for even half of them. "For heaven's sake, don't take me so literally," Clara said, seeing my pained expression. "I'm cramming all I can into your peewee brain because I want you to know about all these things. Knowledge gathers energy. Therefore, knowledge is power. To make sorcery work, we must know what we're doing when we intend the result. Not the purpose, mind you, but the result of the sorcery act. If we intended the purpose of our sorcery actions, we would be creating sorcery, and you and I don't have that much power. I don't think I'm following you, Clara, I said, moving my chair closer. For what don't we have enough power? I mean that even between the two of us, we can't gather the overwhelming energy it would take to create a new purpose. But individually, we can certainly gather enough energy to intend the result of these sorcery passes. No wrinkles for us. That is all we can do, since their purpose, to keep us young and youthful looking, is already set. Is it like the recapitulation, whose end result had been intended beforehand by the ancient sorcerers? I asked. Exactly, Clara said. The intent of all sorcery acts has already been set. All we have to do is hook our awareness to it. She moved her chair across from me so that our knees were barely touching. Then she vigorously rubbed each thumb on the palm of the opposite hand and placed them on the bridge of her nose. She moved them outward with light, even strokes over her eyebrows to the temples. This pass will keep furrows from developing between your eyebrows, she explained. After quickly rubbing together her index fingers, like two sticks starting a fire, she brought them vertically to each side of her nose and gently moved them sideways over her cheeks several times. That's to clear the sinus cavities, she said, deliberately constricting her nasal passages. Instead of picking your nose, do this movement. I didn't appreciate her reference to picking my nose, but I tried the movement and it did clear my sinuses, as she had said. The next one is to keep the cheeks from sagging, she said. She briskly rubbed her palms together, and with long, firm strokes, she slid them up each cheek to her temples. She repeated this movement 6 or 7 times, always using slow, even, upward strokes. I noticed her face was flushed, but she didn't stop yet. She placed the inner edge of her hand, with her thumb folded over her palm, above her upper lip, and rubbed back and forth with a vigorous, saw-like motion. She explained that the spot where the nose and upper lip join, when briskly rubbed, stimulates energy to flow in mild, even bursts. But if greater bursts of energy were needed, they could be obtained by pricking the point at the center of the upper gum, underneath the upper lip, and below the nose septum. If you get drowsy in the cave while recapitulating, rub this point briskly and it will temporarily revive you, she said. I rubbed my upper lip and felt my nose and ears clear. I also experienced a slight numbing sensation on the roof of my palate. It lasted for a few seconds, but took my breath away. It left me with the sensation that I was just about to uncover something that was veiled. Next, Clara moved her index fingers sideways under her chin, again using a quick back and forth saw-like motion. She explained that stimulating the point under the chin produces a calm alertness. She added that we can also activate this point by resting the chin on a low table while sitting on the floor. Following her suggestion, I moved my cushion to the floor and sat on it, and rested my chin on a wooden crate that was just level with my face. By leaning forward, I put a slight pressure on that chin point Clara had indicated. After a few moments, I felt my body settle down. A prickling sensation rose up my back, entered my head, and my breathing became deeper and more rhythmic. Another way to awake the center under the chin, Clara continued, is by lying on the stomach with the hands in fists, one on top of the other, under the chin. She recommended that when doing the exercise with the fists, we should tense them to create pressure under the chin and then relax them to release the pressure. Tensing and relaxing the fists, she said, produces a pulsating movement that sends small bursts of energy to a vital center directly connected with the base of the tongue. She stressed that this exercise should be done cautiously. Otherwise, one might develop a sore throat. I went to sit in the rattan chair again. This group of sorcery passes I've shown you, Clara continued, must be practiced daily until they cease to be massage-like movements and become what they really are, sorcery passes. Watch me, she ordered. I saw her repeat the movements she had shown me, except that this time she was making her fingers and hands dance. Her hands seemed to penetrate deeply into the skin of her face. At other times, they passed over it lightly, as if gliding on the skin's surface, moving so rapidly that they seemed to disappear. Watching her exquisite movements kept me mesmerized. This way of stroking was never in your inventory, she laughed when she had finished. This is sorcery. It requires an intent different from the intent of the daily world. With all the tension that rises to the face, we certainly need a different intent if we are going to relax the muscles and tone the centers located there. Clara said that all our emotions leave traces on our face, more than any other part of our body. Therefore, we have to release accumulated stress using the sorcery passes and their accompanying intent. She stared at me for a moment and remarked, I see from the tension in your face that you've been pondering over your recapitulation. Be sure to do your passes before going to bed tonight to remove those creases in your forehead. I admitted that I had been worrying about my recapitulation. The problem is that you are spending too much time in the cave, Clara said with a wink. I don't want you turning into a bat girl. By now, I think you've gathered enough energy to start learning other things. She jumped out of the chair as if released by a spring. It was so incongruous to see such a powerful woman jumping up so agilely that I had to laugh. I myself got up more slowly, as if I were twice her size. She looked at me and shook her head. "You're too stiff," she noted. "You need to do some special physical exercise to open your vital centers." We went to the rack where the coats and boots were kept, outside the back door of the house. She handed me a wide-rimmed straw hat and led me to a clearing a short distance from the kitchen annex. The sun shone brightly. It was an unusually warm day. Clara told me to put on the hat. She pointed to an area surrounded by a wire fence where the ground had been dug in furrows and lined with small plants in neat parallel rows. "Who cleared the ground and put in all the plants?" I asked, surprised, for I hadn't noticed Clara working there. "It looks like a huge project. Did you do it yourself?" "No, someone else came and did it for me." "But when?" "I've been here every day and didn't see anyone." "That's no mystery," Clara said. "The person who worked on this vegetable garden came when you were at the cave." Her explanation didn't satisfy me. The garden was so well organized that it looked like it had taken more than one person to lay it out. Before I could probe her further, Clara announced, "From now on, you'll take care of this garden. Consider it your new task." I tried not to show my disappointment at being given yet another task that required daily attention. I had thought that by physical exercise, Clara had meant that we were going to practice a new martial art form, preferably one using a classical Chinese weapon, like the broadsword or long pole. Seeing my downcast look, Clara assured me that cultivating a garden would be good for me. It would give me the physical activity and exposure to the sun that I needed for health and well-being. She also pointed out that for more than 6 months, I had been doing nothing but focusing on incidents of my life. Caring for something outside of myself would prevent me from becoming more self-centered. It shocked me to realize that half a year had passed. To me, it seemed like only yesterday that I had come to Clara's house, and my life had changed so drastically that nothing remained the same. "Most people only know how to care for themselves," Clara said, jolting me out of my train of thought, although not very well at that. Because of this overwhelming emphasis, the self becomes distorted, full of outrageous demands. We walked to a wooden gate, the entrance to the garden. "Working in this garden will give you a special kind of energy that you can't get from recapitulating or breathing or practicing kung fu," Clara said. "What kind of energy is that?" "The energy of the earth," she replied, her eyes as green as the new plants. "It complements the energy of the sun. Perhaps you'll feel it entering through your hands as you work the soil, or it may start to flow into your legs as you squat on the ground." I had never worked in a garden before and wasn't sure what to do. I asked her to outline my duties. She peered at me for a moment, as if wondering if she had picked the right person for the task. "The ground is still moist from yesterday's rain," she said. stooping down to touch the soil. But when it's dry, you'll have to carry buckets of water from the stream. Or, if you're very clever, you can devise an irrigation system. I might just do that, I said confidently. I'll construct an electric water pump like the one I saw in a house in the country and connect it to the dynamo. Then I wouldn't have to lug the buckets of water up the hill. It doesn't matter how you do it, as long as the plants get watered. Also, you'll have to feed the plants every 2 weeks from that pile of compost at the end of the garden. And make sure that all the weeds are pulled. Around here, they spread like wildfire. And keep the gate closed so no rabbits can get in. No problem, I assured her, half-heartedly. Good, you can begin now. She pointed to a bucket and told me to fill it with compost and mix it into the soil around each plant. When I returned with the bucket full of what I hoped wasn't night soil, she gave me a digging tool with which to loosen the earth. For a while she watched as I worked, cautioning me not to dig too closely to the tender plants. As I concentrated on the task, I felt a sense of well-being and a strange peace surrounded me. The dirt was cool and soft in my fingers. For the first time since I had been in Clara's house, I felt truly at ease, safe, and protected. The energy of the earth is nurturing, she remarked, as if noticing my change of mood. You're empty enough from your recapitulation that some of it is already creeping into your body. You feel at ease because you know that the earth is the mother of all things. She swept her hands over the rows of plants. Everything comes from the earth. The earth sustains and nourishes us. And when we die, our bodies return to it. She paused for a moment, then added, unless, of course, we succeed in the great crossing. You mean there's a chance that we won't die? I asked. Really, Clara? Aren't you exaggerating? We all have a chance for freedom, she said softly, but it's up to each one of us to seize it and turn it into an actuality. She explained that by storing energy, we can dissolve our preconceptions about the world and the body, thus making room in our warehouse for other possibilities. A chance not to die was one of these possibilities. She said that the best explanation of this extravagant alternative was offered by the sages of ancient China. They claimed that it is feasible for one's personal awareness, or qi, to link up knowingly with the all-encompassing awareness, or Tao. Then, when death comes, one's individual awareness is not dispersed, as in ordinary dying, but expands and unites with the greater whole. She added that the recapitulation in the setting of a cocoon-like cave had enabled me to gather and store energy. Now, I needed to use that energy to strengthen my bond with the abstract force called the spirit. That's why you have to cultivate the garden and absorb its energy. And also the energy of the sun, she said. The sun bestows its energy on the earth and causes things to grow. If you allow the sun's light to enter your body, your energy too will flourish. Clara told me to wash my hands in a bucket of water and to sit on a log by a clearing outside the fenced garden, for she was going to show me how to begin to direct my attention to the sun. She said that I should always wear a wide-rimmed hat in order to shield my head and face. She also warned me never to do any of the breathing passes she was about to show me for more than a few minutes at a time. Why are they called breathing passes? I asked. Because the preset intent of these passes is to pass energy from the breath to the area where we place our attention. It could be an organ in our body, or an energy channel, or even a thought or a memory, as in the case of the recapitulation. What is important is that energy is transmitted, thus fulfilling the intent established beforehand. The result is sheer magic, because it appears as if it had sprung out of nowhere. That's why we call these movements and breaths sorcery passes. Clara instructed me to face the sun with my eyes closed. Then take a deep breath through my mouth and pull the sun's warmth and light into my stomach. I had to hold it there for as long as I could, then swallow, and finally exhale any air that was left. Pretend you're a sunflower, she teased. Always keep your face toward the sun when you breathe. The light of the sun charges the breath with power. So be sure to take big gulps of air and completely fill your lungs. Do this 3 times. She explained that in the exercise, the energy of the sun automatically spreads throughout the entire body. But we could deliberately send the sun's healing rays to any area by touching the spot where we want the energy to go, or simply by using the mind to direct energy to it. Actually, when you have practiced this breath long enough, you don't need to use your hands anymore, she went on. You can just visualize the sun's rays oozing directly into a specific part of your body. She suggested that I do the same 3 breaths, but this time breathe through my nose and visualizing the light flowing down into my back, thus energizing the channels along my spine. That way, the sun's rays would flood my entire body. If you want to bypass breathing through the nose or mouth altogether, Clara said, you can breathe directly with your stomach or your chest or your back. You can even bring the energy up the body through the soles of your feet. She told me to concentrate on my lower abdomen, on the spot just below my navel, and breathe in a relaxed fashion until I could feel a bond forming between my body and the sun. As I inhaled under her guidance, I could feel the inside of my stomach becoming warmer and filled with light. After a while, Clara told me to practice breathing with other areas. She touched the spot on my forehead between my eyes. When I concentrated my attention there, my head became flushed with a yellow glow. Clara recommended that I absorb as much of the sun's vitality as I could by holding my breath, then rolling my eyes in a clockwise direction before exhaling. I did as she instructed, and the yellow glow intensified. Now stand up and try breathing with your back, she said, and helped me to take off my jacket. I turned my back to the sun and tried to place my attention on the various centers she pointed out with a touch. One was between my shoulder blades. Another was at the nape of the neck. As I breathed, visualizing the sun on my back, I felt a warmth move up and down my spine, then rush to my head. I became so dizzy that I nearly lost my balance. That's enough for today, Clara said, handing me my jacket. I sat down feeling giddy, as if I were happily drunk. The light of the sun is pure power, Clara said. After all, it's the most intensely gathered energy there is. She said that an invisible line of energy flows out directly from the top of the head, upward to the realm of not being. Or it can flow from the realm of not being down into us via an opening at the very center of the top of the head. If you like, you can call it the lifeline that links us to a greater awareness, she said. The sun, if used properly, charges this line and causes it to spring into action. That's why the crown of the head must always be protected. Clara said that before we returned to the house, she was going to show me another powerful sorcery pass. One involving a series of body movements. She said that it had to be executed in one single motion, with strength, precision, and grace, but without straining. I can't urge you enough to practice all the passes I've shown you, she said. They are the indispensable companions of the recapitulation. This one did wonders for me. Watch me closely. See if you can see my double. Your what? I said, panicking. I was afraid I would miss something crucial, or not know what to make of it, even if I saw it. Watch my double, she repeated, enunciating the words carefully. It's like a double exposure. You have enough energy to intend, with me, the result of this sorcery pass. But tell me again, Clara, what is the result? The double, the ethereal body, the counterpart of the physical body, which by now you must know, or at least suspect. It's not merely a projection of the mind. She moved to an area of level ground and stood with her feet together and her arms at her sides. Clara, wait. I'm sure I don't have enough energy to see what you're referring to. because I can't even understand it conceptually. It doesn't matter if you understand it conceptually. Just watch closely. Maybe I have enough power for both of us to intend my double. In the most agile movement I had yet seen her perform, she brought her arms over her head with her palms touching in a gesture of prayer. Then she arched backward, forming an elegant bow with her arms stretched out behind her, almost to the ground. She flipped her body literally to the left, so that instantly she ended up bending forward, almost touching the ground. And before I could even open my mouth in surprise, she had flipped back, and her body was gracefully arched backward. She flipped back and forth 2 more times, as if to give me a chance to see her inconceivably fast and graceful movements, or perhaps a chance to see her double. At one point in her movement, I saw her as a hazy shape, just as if she were a life-size photograph that had been double exposed. For a fraction of an instant, there were 2 Claras moving, one a millisecond behind the other. I was completely perplexed by what I saw, which when I thought about it, I could explain as being an optical illusion created by her speed. But at a bodily level, I knew that my eyes had seen something inconceivable. I had had enough energy to suspend my common sense expectations and allow another possibility to enter in. Clara stopped her exquisite acrobats and came and stood beside me, not even out of breath. She explained that this sorcery pass enables the body to unite with its double in the realm of not being, whose entrance hovers above the head and slightly behind it. By bending backward with the arms outstretched, we create a bridge. Clara said, and since the body and the double are like 2 ends of a rainbow, we can intend them to join. Is there any specific time when I should practice this pass? I asked. This is a sorcery pass of the twilight, she said. But you have to have lots of energy and be extremely calm in order to do it. The twilight helps you to become calm and gives you an added boost of energy. That's why the end of the day is the best time to practice it. Should I try it now? I asked, when she looked at me doubtfully. I assured her that I had studied gymnastics as a child and was eager to try it. The question is not whether you have studied gymnastics as a child, but how calm you are now, Clara replied. I said that I was as calm as I could be. Clara laughed in disbelief, but told me to go ahead and try it. She would watch over me to make sure I didn't break anything by twisting too forcefully. I planted my feet on the ground, bent my knees, and began slowly executing my best backbend. But when I got past a certain point, gravity took over, and I fell clumsily to the ground. You're the farthest thing from being calm, Clara concluded, amiably, as she helped me up. What's bothering you, Taisha? Rather than revealing to Clara what was on my mind. I asked if I could try the movement again. But the second time, I had more trouble than before. I was sure my mental and emotional concerns had made me lose my balance. I knew that the demands of the self, as Clara had said, were really outrageous. They took all my attention. I saw no solution except to confess to Clara what was on my mind. I told her what bothered me the most was that I seemed to have reached a standstill in my recapitulation. "What is causing it?" Clara asked. I admitted that it had to do with my family. I know now, without a doubt, that they dislike me, I said sadly. Not that I didn't suspect it all along, because I did. And I used to get into rages about it. But now that I've reviewed my past, I can't get angry the way I used to. So I don't know what to do. Clara eyed me critically, moving her head backward to size me up. "What is there to do?" she asked. "You've done the work and found out that they disliked you. That's good. I don't see the problem." Her cavalier tone annoyed me. I expected, if not sympathy, at least understanding and an intelligent comment. "The problem," I said emphatically, on the verge of tears, "is that I'm stuck. I know that I need to go deeper than I have, but I can't. All I can think is that they disliked me, whereas I loved them." Wait. Didn't you tell me that you hated them?" I distinctly remember. "Yes, I did say that. But at the time I said it, I didn't know what I was saying. I really loved them, my brothers too. Later I learned to despise them, but that was much later, not as a child. As a child, I wanted them to pay attention to me and play with me." "I think I see what you mean," Clara said, nodding. "Let's sit down and discuss this." We sat down again on the log. "As I see it, your problem stems from a promise you made as a child." "You did make a promise as a child, didn't you, Taisha?" she asked, looking at me squarely in the eye. "I don't recall making any promises," I said sincerely. In a friendly tone, Clara suggested that perhaps I didn't recall because I had been very young when I made it, or because it was more of a feeling than a promise actually stated in so many words. Clara explained that as children, we often make vows and then become bound by those vows, even though we can no longer remember making them. "Such impulsive pledges can cost us our freedom," Clara said. "Sometimes we are bound by preposterous childish devotion or pledges of undying, eternal love." She said that there are moments in everyone's life, especially in early childhood, when we have wanted something so badly that we automatically fixed our total intent on it, which, once fixed, remains in place until we fulfill our desire. She elaborated by saying that vows, oaths, and promises bind our intent, so that from then on, our actions, feelings, and thoughts are consistently directed toward fulfilling or maintaining those commitments, regardless of whether or not we remember having made them. She advised me to review, during the recapitulation, all the promises I had ever made in my lifetime, especially the ones made in haste or ignorance or faulty judgment. For unless I deliberately retrieved my intent from them, it would never rise freely to be expressed in the present. I tried to think about what she was saying, but my mind was a mass of confusion. Suddenly, I remembered a scene from my very early childhood. I must have been 6. I wanted to be cuddled by my mother, but she pushed me away, saying that I was too old for cuddling, and told me to go clean my room. Yet the youngest of my brothers, who was 4 years older than I, and my mother's favorite, was always cuddled by her. I swore then that I would never love or get close to any of them ever again. And from that day on, I seem to have kept my promise by always remaining estranged from them. If it's true that they didn't love you, Clara said, it was your fate not to be loved by your family. Accept it. Besides, what possible difference could it make now, whether they loved you or not? It still made a difference, but I didn't tell Clara that. I too had a problem, very much like yours, Clara went on. I had always been aware of being a friendless, fat, miserable girl. But through recapitulating, I found out that my mother had deliberately fattened me up since the day I was born. She reasoned that a fat, homely girl would never leave home, and she wanted me there as her servant for life. I was horrified. This was the first time Clara had revealed anything about her past to me. I went to my teacher, who was definitely the greatest teacher one can ever have, for advice about this problem, she went on. And he said to me, Clara, I feel for you, but you are wasting your time, because then was then, now is now, and now there is only time for freedom. You see, I sincerely felt that my mother had ruined me for life. I was fat and couldn't stop eating. It took me a long time to get the meaning of then was then, now is now. And now there is only time for freedom. Clara was silent for a moment, as if to let the impact of her words settle on me. You have only time to fight for freedom, Taisha, she said, giving me a nudge. Now is now.